Listening to Ken Hudnall. This is the Ken Hudnall Show. Coming to you from our studios right in exciting El Paso, Texas. Gateway to the Old West and the most haunted city in the country. Well, today is June the 9th, the 160th day of the year. Just 205 days remain to the year's over with. Holidays observances. National Meal Prep Day. National Donald Duck Day. Love Island Day. National Strawberry Rhubarb Pie Day. World Phospholipid Antibody Syndrome Day. For those not familiar with that, it's an autoimmune disorder. The immune system mistakenly attacks among the proteins in the blood. Kind of like Congress going after American citizens because they think they're above the rest of us. Carl Triangle Day, Monday, Mid-Night Week, Loneliness Awareness Week, King Green Britain Bike Week, Scleroderma Awareness Week, National Pet Wedding Week. Now, a couple of other things. It's National Earl Day. This is also the day when Donald Duck debuted, which is why it's National Donald Duck Day. A dam burst in South Dakota. We had the Ghost Train fire in Sydney. And a major suicide bombing in Afghanistan. And in 1967, this was the anniversary of the Six-Day War when Israel captured the Gun Run Heights. Now, let's see what we've got in the news. White House fires back at Governor Newsom. Says he's too weak to protect Los Angeles. There were ICE raids, and the left went nuts. Started protesting and attacking the ICE agents. And elected officials in Los Angeles came out on the side of the protesters. The Democratic representative had a vulgar demand of the ICE officers led to calls to expel her from Congress, and well, they should. Trump called out the National Guard. There's a lot of Mexican flags being waved, and the attitude about that is if you want to be Mexican, there's the border. Riders destroy American flags at the same time they're waving the Mexican flags in these anti-ICE demonstrations. Simone Biles is attacking Robbie Gaines over Gaines' anti-transgender position. Now, why Biles has got her back up is anybody's guess. Going around with Gaines, Simone Biles basically incinerated her legacy in 2 tweets. Biles has been attacking Gaines on social media. Gaines dropped the last episode of the Gaines for Girls podcast on Outkick and recorded the show a few hours after Biles came after her own ex. Gaines did say Biles was one of the best athletes ever performed in sports, but her post put a blank mark on her resume. Don Lemon agrees with Kathy Griffin. Something was wrong with Trump winning the election. Now, those two together still leave a lot to be desired. Both of them trash their reputation in their unbridled attempt to get President Trump. Israel stops the Thunberg-led flotilla to detain the activist. He's been warned to watch the October 7th footage of Hamas attacking knowledge at the various events. Lindbergh, for whatever reason, thinks she is an unbelievable federal judge. She thinks she's one of God's anointed to go lead her people, as she put it. Experts warn Americans are missing a mineral that affects 300 bodily functions. We're talking about magnesium. Well, the trust in Prince Harry has been shattered in England. Kate Middleton, who is a bit of an apologist for Harry, stands firm with Prince William, of course. Florida stands up against virus, and Jacksonville Baptist University president who promised DEI 2.0. Santa Ono is a sole nominee to lead the University of Florida and has been defeated. It's being claimed to be a success for Florida as well as higher education across the country. For a long time, our best universities fell like dominoes to the worldwide virus. Schools where rigor and merit were meant to flourish became institutions of identity politics and far-out leftism. They moved seamlessly from safe spaces to land acknowledgments down to Israel encampments. Education was kind of took a back seat. Ono was the former University of Michigan president he was considered a moderate. Moderate in this case meant somebody who promised in his inauguration speech in 2023 to implement DEI 2.0. He described racism as one of America's original sins. His DEI 2.0 call for emphasizing DEI in terms of strategic priorities, the campus-wise effort to develop institutional constituent capacity to implement improved DEI initiatives, fully institutionalize DEI into the university and can ensure continued progress and long-term sustainability. In other words, if you're a minority, you're wonderful. If you're part of the majority, screw you. A lifelong devotion to inserting left politics into all of his roles. Well, it's backfired now. Diddy's ex has testified as the jury has been shown texts accusing the rapper of cheating. Hires investors on U.S.-China trade talks. GOP leadership unleashes fury on Governor Walsh. Tim Walsh. Tampon Tim. Ahead of congressional hearings. Democratic Governors Tim Walsh, County Hospital, J.D. Pritzker been called to testify on sanctuary policies for the House Oversight Commission, committee rather. President Trump's travel ban takes effect as the White House warns of national security threats. Users of weight loss drugs, such as Ozempic, twice as likely to suffer from vision loss, according to a new study. BBC News correspondents suspended after anti-Trump cottonheads showed a pattern of behavior. Karen Moran has a history of attacking Trump that dates back to the first term in 2017. He deleted social media posts on news comparing the president to a Fuhrer and mocking the idea of his funeral. The New York Times calls the National Guard to perform at the real emergency amid the LA riots. The New York Times, of course, is been left leaning as long as I don't know anything about it. celebrates with UFC star Kayla Harrison after she wins the title. She defeated Juliana Pena via a submission. That was her third bout in the organization. She won the UFC Women's Bantamweight Championship, setting herself up for an epic fight against Amanda Nunes. Let's see. Democratic Representatives AOC and Ming are silent as Avenue of Sweethearts. In other words, the red light district extends itself further into their areas. Prostitution and filthy streets are the usual sights in their districts. But AOC is too busy trying to tell the world how to function. Newsom's tax threat is the Secretary of Treasury said it's dangerous. It's good. And withheld $80 billion in federal taxes amid a transatlantic controversy. I don't know why the Democrats are so intent on having males and women's sports. But they are. 60 Minutes correspondent Scott Paley warns the CBS settlement with Trump would be very damaging. Sellers face a harsh new reality as listings hit a record $698 billion in value. Coco Gauff says Trump's election led to down period in the U.S. after her French Open victory. She says she's patriotic. Just doesn't like the president. Well, I didn't like China Joe either. That in turn against my country. Well, let's see what else we got. Joann's, Macy's, and other store closures are part of a 274% spike in retail layoffs in 2025. The DOGE efforts are said to be the leading reason for job cut announcements. Personally, I think we should evaluate the net worth of the elected officials. When Nancy Pelosi's worth $120 million, they only get $275,000 a year. Where'd she get the rest of it? Flashpoints are said to be on the verge of igniting a global war. Ukrainian drone strikes, failed nuclear talks, Taiwan invasion warnings. It's led a lot of folks to think there's going to be a full-blown World War III. Conservative activist sounds off after being jailed in what he calls a woke city for transgender signs. Billboard Chris sounds off after an arrest in the most woke city for opposing transgender treatment for kids. Activist Chris Elston and ADF International's Lois McClatchy Miller said they were sharing a peaceful message when a cloud turned hostile and they got arrested. Brussels, Belgium, which is known for being a woke city, were holding signs opposing transgender medical treatment for children. Yes, let's go change the sex of all the children. Makes no sense. Manhunt's underway after deadly shooting in Las Vegas near a tourist hotspot. Video showed terrified tourists dropping to the ground amid reports of gunfire. 2 people were killed in a shooting on the Las Vegas Strip near the Bellagio Fountains. Officers ran toward the sounds of gunfire and found 2 victims lying on the sidewalk. Both of them died from their wounds. The Las Vegas Metropolitan Police Department believes they have identified the suspect. So the next violence was an isolated incident. They said the suspect and the victim had previously engaged in some type of conflict using a variety of social media platforms. So they're determined to catch the person they believe is responsible. Stewart has an unusual break into the pool workout. He helps him keep fit at the age of 80. It's he jokes that it takes a lot of women, drugs, and wine to keep up with his busy performance schedule. But he is now, he says, enjoying healthier habits. Skydiving plane crashed in Tennessee moments after takeoff. Left multiple passengers injured and 20 people on board. The aircraft went down near Tullahoma Airport. I know that area well. It took off at about 12:30 in the afternoon and crashed shortly after takeoff. There were 20 people, including crew members. The plane experienced an unknown issue shortly after takeoff, resulted in an impact on trees and terrain. 3 people went to hospitals for medical treatment. One victim was sent by ground transport for more serious injuries. So jumping out of airplanes is not the most dangerous thing you can do. Flying seems to be the most dangerous thing you can do. Trump administrations were doing arresting undocumented immigrants. At the courthouse, fast-track deportations that Biden refused to do. And this system is going off again. I don't know why computers seem to think they have the right to do whatever it is they want to do. At Home store is preparing to file bankruptcy. We got a major at Home store not too far from here. All right. Well, we're going to go back and talking about World War II related ghosts. I've got a lot of feedback. Folks seem to like those stories. Now, experts said the connection between conflict and other activities no mystery. Collision goes something along the lines of death plus high emotional intensity equals ghost. Well, it may surprise you to know that what are referred to as warbirds still fly in the UK skies. During World War II, the skies above the United Kingdom buzzed with a making model of warbird. The Allied and the Axis powers could produce bombers and fighters and transporters, made England the world's biggest aircraft carrier. And after the war, you'd expect the skies of the UK to be quiet. But instead, dozens of witnesses claim to see World War II era planes cruising the blue above England. When the witnesses raise the alarm, authorities often can't explain the appearance of these planes. No air shows. The air traffic controllers have no record of seeing these planes, but a lot of witnesses have seen them. One of the things World War II has done is given us what amounts to a apparition invasion. Ghost mules, haunted Mexican restrooms, and even haunted tour buses. But how about an entire beach being haunted by legions of ghosts? And that's exactly what a group of holiday vacationers said they came across while on a holiday at the beaches at Yale, site of a bloody botched raid in World War II. It was during the early morning hours of August 4th, a few weeks before the anniversary of the parade, or Revelation Jubilee as it was called. They said they heard the sound of cannons and the shouts and screaming of soldiers. There was even air cover. According to the witnesses, said they heard the scream of dive bombers, and the vacationers went out to investigate the next morning. They didn't find a single sign of any type of armed incursion. And of course, they promptly reported the experience to authorities. But you might expect the ghost of a German general such as Roman Rommel will be riding through the sands of North Africa, or watching the English Channel from the cliffs of Omaha Beach, or even appearing in his homeland in Germany. But believe it or not, as I was saying, the best place to see Roman Rommel's ghost is in the American South. In graveyards and hotels in Virginia. It seems that he made a secret visit before the war to America to study Civil War battlefields and battles. Now, researchers say they can't find any evidence about this secret mission, but it's a secret. Believers say the ghost is evidence enough for them. In the Pacific Theater, which was a scene of some of World War II's most violent battles, Okinawa, Pacific Island, about 1,000 miles from Tokyo, that island became personal. Japanese. And I'm not sure what started my coughing. Anyway, the Japanese strategists knew if Americans seized Okinawa, they'd have a base suitable to stage an invasion of Japan's mainland. They filled the imagination of the island's civilians with tales of American atrocities. True or not, when we did invade, thousands of Okinawans reportedly jumped off cliffs to their deaths. Visitors at the island say that they heard the sound of footsteps rush by, heading for the cliffs, and heard screams as if people would jump. Some even said when they heard the footsteps and simultaneously felt a breeze blow by them, others believe the presence of spirits passed directly through them as the ghosts reenact their mass desperate leap. And then, of course, we have haunted harbors. Our battleships played key offensive and defensive roles in World War II. These ships were brought back to the States where they became museums to preserve history and serve as floating tributes to the sailors who served on board these floating fortresses. Apparently, some of these sailors are still there. According to legend, over the mid-Cape Fear River, the USS North Carolina, for example, is said to be haunted with several ghosts. This is seen and felt to see presences touring and working and investigating on board the ships. The famed Swiss psychiatrist and psychoanalyst Carl Jung coined the term synchronicity for events that seem related but aren't causally connected. Others might call these phenomena signs. And Jung must have had a field day during World War II when synchronicities became part of the headlines and war coverage. There was an advertisement that featured a graphic with dice. The numbers 12 and 7 seem to predict Japan's attack on Pearl Harbor. Another case, code names for aspects of the D-Day invasion cropped up in crossword puzzles. Now people are starting to wonder whether it was just coincidence or manifestation of unknown forces, or signs that there was spies that were uncovering that information. And from that, let's talk about the Foo Fighters, which we've done a couple of shows about. Everybody knows the modern UFO era began when Ken Hudnall made his 1947 sightings of a formation of unidentified craft flying like saucers if you skipped it across the water. In the air in Washington. During World War II, pilots claimed to see objects fly in the air or even at their formations. Descriptions of these craft resembled what Arnold saw during his flight over the Cascades. Allied pilots dubbed these weird flying machines Foo Fighters. And a lot of ufologists say these sightings ushered in the first credible reports of UFOs in modern history. We've heard about ghost ships and ghost planes and even ghost trains. But according to one group of witnesses, there's a ghost tank that may still be patrolling the former battlefields of the Eastern Front. And then the witnesses told the newspaper that one night while scouring the fields for artifacts from the war, a group of trophy hunters said they distinctly heard the unmistakable clanking of steel treads and the roar of an engine, cutting through the otherwise silent darkness. Too scared to investigate at the moment. Who wants to come up on a Soviet T-34 tank running around, let alone a ghost tank? They did report finding what looked like twin tracks of some type of vehicle in the ground, and those tracks were fresh. And I spent a lot of my military career with armored personnel carriers. When you've seen a tread of one of those machines, you don't forget it. Well, sometimes amazing things happen when you're dealing with the paranormal. How about Abraham Lincoln's ghost and a naked Winston Churchill? Those are certain images that can make an impression. Throughout the war, Churchill visited the White House several times. And according to several sources, during one of those visits, he stayed in what's now known as the Lincoln bedroom. He'd just come out of the shower, walked into the bedroom naked, saw leaning against the fireplace, none other than Abraham Lincoln. Churchill stopped, looked at him, and said, "Well, good evening, Mr. President. You seem to have me at a disadvantage." According to Churchill, Lincoln acknowledged the Prime Minister with a knowing look and like all good former heads of state who are technically dead, he slowly faded from view. Well, secret agents during World War II came from all walks of life. Some were military, some were civilian. Only one claimed to be the Antichrist, though. According to historians and paranormal theorists, Mr. Crowley, a magician, occult legend, master provocateur, also served as a secret agent, or maybe a secret agent provocateur during the war. These experts even suggested Ian Fleming, creator of James Bond, an intelligence officer in World War II, enlisted Crowley's magical talents to cast a spell that eventually lured Rudolf Hess, Hitler's head henchman, to secretly fly to England on a so-called peace mission. Another story says the Prime Minister Winston Churchill's Leave for Victory size accidentally called gesture, posed by a man known as Secret Agent 666, after the number allegedly assigned to Aleister Crowley. Well, as I said, let's talk about Leavenworth. U.S. Army Garrison Fort Leavenworth is widely considered one of the most haunted posts in America. But though it is actively used today, residents and visitors alike claim it's host to a myriad of ghosts that wood its buildings and grounds. One of the most famous of these ghosts is said to be General George Armstrong Custer. He's said to roam the general's residence. Though he didn't die there, his spirit is said to remain after he's found guilty of mistreating his troops and deserting his command. Now, some buildings, of course, are more haunted than others. The Rookery at 14 Summer Place is considered both the oldest and the most haunted. Army reports numerous incidents that have happened to Rookery residents, including missing items and unexplained noises and spectral visitors and a lot more. One of the ghosts is said to be a woman with long hair who attacks the residents by clawing at them with her fingernails. The haunted sites of St. Ignatius Chapel, which was rebuilt numerous times due to fires. A house now stands at the first location of the chapel, and residents who live in that house have claimed to see the ghost of a young priest who died in the fire. As for the rebuilt chapel, it inexplicably burned to the ground again in 2000. Though the Battle of the Little Big One happened in 1873, visitors today to the battlefield claim they can still see and hear the spirits of U.S. Army soldiers and Native American warriors fighting. Now, a cemetery and national monument is no surprise this site of such death and violence is haunted with those that passed there, including U.S. Army General George Armstrong Custer. I will point out that at the time of the Little Bighorn, he was a colonel. He's been a brevet general during the Civil War, and after the war, reverted to his permanent rank of colonel. Stonehouse, the late 19th century caretaker's house at the cemetery, located there, is home to many apparitions, including mutilated soldiers and headless cavalrymen. The Crow tribe called those that lived in this house during the 1800s ghost herders. They saw the flag the caretakers raised and know it as a signal for spirits to come out at dusk and return to their graves at dawn. And of course, we have Jefferson Barracks. Now the home of the Army and Air National Guard, but that's a spooky sentry that has a bullet hole in his head. He still confronts soldiers in the barracks headquarters. Legend has it he still thinks he's on duty during a munitions raid and believes the living soldiers are enemies. One soldier was once so scared by this bloody sentry he left his post and the Army. It's probably still running. Another older story talks about a Halloween party at the Veterans Hospital in part of the barracks where a Civil War era ghost made an appearance. A man in a realistic Civil War officer's uniform made an appearance in front of the party's host. When the host asked him how he liked the party, the man was rude and vanished in front of the host. Later when the host asked about the guests, nobody knew him or really anybody who wore that particular costume to the event. And no, this next story isn't based in the U.S. The tale does deserve to be included in our list. During World War II, a remote village in Switzerland became the site of a number of strange happenings when a British company of soldiers stayed there. Wood and tarts and valuables began disappearing, which were dismissed until a child went missing. And more children, as well as a private from a British company, vanished. Rumors of a monster began to spread. One night, soldiers saw a mysterious figure and chased it, thinking it was part of what was going on in the village. And then they never caught the figure. The soldier disappeared. The one they were chasing disappeared into a cave. And the soldiers chasing him discovered the existence of the cave. Shots were fired from inside the cave, and the soldiers, of course, returned fire. When they eventually entered the cave, they found the body of the British private had been shot through the heart. It was surrounded by the half-eaten bodies of the children who went missing. Nobody knows for sure what actually took place. But the strange happenings stopped. Now, The let's talk about more ghost stories from World War II. How about a story about a B-17 that actually landed itself? It was a cold day in November 1944. An aircraft crew stationed in Belgium spotted something unusual. A large plane was heading toward them. It was an American B-17, the legendary Flying Fortress. Now, this sight, of course, was a little strange. The landing gear was down. The aircraft was coming down fast. No scheduled landings, though, leading the RAF unit to conclude that this must be an emergency. And they were right. But the reasons behind the landing were something that they could never have anticipated. As the plane landed, it appeared largely intact. Although the landing was anything but smooth. The plane bounced and swayed at one point, and came perilously close to clipping the wing before grinding to a halt in an open field. So from the very beginning, the men watching thought something was off, waiting for the crew to emerge and explain the unusual landing, but after 20 minutes, nobody came out of the plane. So finally, the watchers cautiously approached the B-17. Its engines were still running. When they finally opened the hatch, they met with a eerie silence. The plane was empty, completely devoid of crew. Now, there were signs of recent human presence. Half-eaten candy bars lay abandoned, and the navigator's code book with the day's operational codes was still on board. And most perplexing of all were the neatly packed parachutes, untouched and ready for use, enough for an entire crew. Looked like the men had vanished into thin air, leaving the plane to land itself. Now, this bizarre situation this bizarre situation sparked rumors of ghost stories and supernatural explanations spreading across military circles like wildfire. But the real story, while no less extraordinary, was far more grounded in reality. The B-17 had suffered a critical malfunction, likely due to enemy fire, left it unable to stay in the air. Knowing the plane wouldn't make it back, the crew actually jettisoned everything they could to let the load before they bailed out. Incredibly, after the crew jumped out, the engine stabilized enough to keep the aircraft airborne. And this unmanned B-17 continued to descend toward Brussels, flying on its own. Now, without all the engines properly functioning, of course, it couldn't stay in the air for long. The remarkable feat of mechanics and luck, the aircraft managed to perform a rough and effective landing, witnessed by a number of RAF personnel. We've got another story. It's a continuation of the one about the children disappearing in the village. During the winter of 1943, he was stationed with the British Army in a village in the Swiss Alps. And the village became snowed in, cutting off all communication. The roads were blocked. Our battalion found themselves stranded in the Alps for the rest of the winter. Now, the villagers predominantly spoke German, and of course, the soldiers only knew English. One evening, while the soldiers at a local bar, the man began to shout at him, "Where'd you take the children?" Now, his words were somewhat unclear, and of course, the soldiers were confused. They managed to find a translator, and escorted the man back to their base. He explained since the soldiers' arrival, a number of small objects had gone missing. A tart, wood, a halberd, which is a type of axe, and then children began to vanish. Well, at first, the soldiers thought it might just be a bizarre and tragic incident. After all, the village was isolated in the mountains, surrounded by snow and wild animals, but the children had vanished. That was something that couldn't be ignored. Well, the crew captain captain assured the villagers he'd look into the matter. He sent out night patrols from Indian men out to search the streets for whoever or whatever might be behind these strange disappearances. And that very night, a soldier in the private regiment vanished from the barracks. Well, the loss of children was one thing, but a grown man, a soldier disappearing, seemed improbable. An animal, even a wolf, could have made off with a healthy soldier. So rumors spread throughout the battalion that some sort of monstrous creature was probably working in the mountains, emerging at night to feast on the village inhabitants. Well, despite the growing fear, the patrols continued, and one night, a few soldiers spotted a figure standing outside the window of a darkened house, peering inside. They shouted for that figure to stop and turn and ran. So they, of course, chased it. The figure eventually disappeared into a hidden cave where they began shooting at him. And of course, in the firefight, the soldiers returned fire. When the gunfire finally stopped, they approached the cave, and inside they found Reginald's lifeless body. He had been shot through the heart. And he was surrounded by 7 half-eaten children. Well, Reginald hadn't disappeared when the children started disappearing. What was the story? They never got an answer. Well, in 1942, the L-8 blimp took off from Treasure Island. That's in the Bay Area. We were doing a routine submarine spotting mission. There were 2 men on board. Hours later, it returned to land, but something was off. As the blimp came in to land, instead of touching down gently as it had in the past, it crashed into a house in Daly City. Well, despite the crash, everything on board was in perfect order. The emergency gear had been used, all the equipment was counted for, but the crew had vanished. The disappearance remains one of the most puzzling aviation mysteries. Now, the L-8 mission started off as a standard patrol. An hour and a half into the flight, the pilot radioed to report they were investigating a possible oil slick spotted in the water. And that was the last communication heard from the blimp. Later on that day, it was spotted drifting aimlessly along the coast. Its midsection started to sag. As I said, eventually it came down and crashed into a house in Daly City. A rescue team sent to the crash discovered something even more bizarre. The doors to the blimp's cabin were open. But there was no crew, no sign of a struggle. Everything was just as it should have been, except minus the men. Now, the 2 men who had been on board were never found. Their disappearance remains one of the biggest mysteries of World War II. Let's go to Rio City in the Philippines. Diplomat Hotel. I've talked about this time or two in the past. A very eerie history. Originally built as a monastery in the early 1900s. Taken over during World War II by the Japanese, who brutally beheaded all the clergy and the nuns when they took over the monastery. After the war, the building was repurposed as a sanatorium before it became a hotel. Over the years, guests at the hotel reported a number of unsettling experiences. A lot of folks claimed to see shadowy figures. Some talked about a mysterious woman in white who wanders the halls. Others heard inexplicable sounds. In the dead of night, screams, bangs, and eerie noises that came from nowhere. Today, the hotel's abandoned. Its desolate halls now a prime destination for ghost hunters. Now, interestingly enough, there have been many stories told by competent people, strange happenings relating to World War II. I mean, let's face it, the war left scars all over the planet. And those scars actually shape the world today. Tremendous loss of life can still be felt on battlefield grounds, in hospitals, in towns and cities where so many fought to the very end. For some, the war seems to rage on as spectral figures dressed in their uniforms or have been seen harming the places where they died or the places of special importance to them. All these stories remain unproven or unexplained, but those who've seen these ghosts or felt their presences believe they're very, very real. Let's talk about the SS Alchemist. It was known as a cursed ship from the beginning. It started in World War II. The ships are being pushed into production on at a staggering pace. It was built in just 10 days on the production line. The corners were cut and the ship was ramshackle from the start. There were even rumors the ship was completed so quickly that welders are actually sealed into the hull where they slowly died. Dead welders were only some of the rumors of accidents and deaths that plagued the construction of the SS Alchemist. Once it was put out to sea, its reputation only continued. Originally under the name of George M. Shriver, being changed to Vigo Hestlin. From the moment it went into service, October 11th, 1943, it was plagued with technical difficulties. It would often break down. August of 1944, the ship's deadly history got another chapter when a murder-suicide took place. The ship was in port in Naples where a crew member shot and killed a female Canadian radio operator before he shot himself. After the war, the ship changed hands before ending up rechristened as the Greek ship, the SS Alchemist. Well, the bad luck and technical difficulties continued to follow the ship, as well as a number of stories about ghosts and hauntings. In 1963, the ship ran aground off the coast of Western Australia. The propeller was damaged, so efforts were made to tow the ship to Fremantle for emergency repairs before being taken to Hong Kong for larger repairs. While in Fremantle, the ship inexplicably caught fire. When it was finally ready to tow to Hong Kong, the tow cable snapped and the ship ran aground once again, just north of Fremantle this time. In an effort to keep the ship going, caretakers left on the ship till proper efforts could be made to salvage it. And they reported feelings of being watched. They smelled cooking food coming from the galley, and there was a great feeling of unease the whole time they were on board. Efforts to salvage the ship failed as one company after another tried. In one attempt, the ship that was trying to tow out the SS Alchemist caught fire, causing the Alchemist to run aground again. This time it was left where it was. Plans were made to demolish the ship, but the man in charge died in a plane crash. Anybody attempted to salvage or destroy that ship, they were unfortunate accidents. All efforts have been abandoned. The ship remains there today. Well, some of the most pervasive ghost stories to come out of World War II have dealt with ghost planes. That's what I started this segment about. There was a war that filled the sky with planes and showed how bigger and better planes were revolutionizing modern warfare. It's not too surprising people would continue to report seeing and hearing planes in the sky long after the war ended. And there were stories that defy explanations even when there's evidence to prove the stories are real. The ghost plane stories are told about the area of Dark Peak, which was known for being the location of more than 50 plane crashes over the year. One such ghost plane was spotted over England. A freak apparition or something brought on by the post-traumatic stress of the war. It happened in 2015 when a World War II plane was seen flying over Dark Peak in northern Derbyshire. And this area is known for ghost and aircraft sightings, and that's probably what gives the area its name. 2015 World War II bomber plane seen flying over the area by several witnesses. The plane was identified by a former RAF pilot, so we'll learn first in the look of these World War II planes. An RAF member identified the plane as a Lancaster. engine heavy bomber used by the RAF during the war. Another pilot disagreed and thought it was a Liberator, a smaller 4-engine bomber that was used by the Americans. Another witness agreed it was too small to be a Lancaster and added it had an antenna that was camouflaged. It never landed, and there's no record of any scheduled flights of historical aircraft. It's also of note that the plane was silent as it flew, which is very different from the deafening roar of either a Lancaster or a Liberator. That bomber wasn't the only ghost plane to be seen in the area. 2017, more reports of ghost plane sightings surfaced. This time, several people reported seeing a Douglas Dakota. It was a plane flown by the RAF during World War II, and there was no more in operation. One witness reported something went wrong with the plane that seemed to be flying straight toward them. Witness reported that the plane turned sideways and then vanished without a trace. Now, a search of historical records did reveal that a Douglas Dakota crashed in the area of the sightings in the 1940s. Now let's talk about the Bovington Tank Museum, located in Dorset, southwest England. The museum offers a fascinating look at the history of the tank and has the largest collection of tanks in the world. There's over 300 tanks from over 26 countries, and even includes a British World War I Mark I, the oldest surviving combat tank. Many tanks left over from bloody battles, it's not too surprising there are dark histories tied to a lot of them. One of the most well-known stories of hauntings at the Bovington Tank Museum is the story of a ghost who's been dubbed Herman the German. He's said to haunt the Tiger 131 tank. The tank is a German Tiger 1 heavy tank that was captured by the British during World War II. It's the only operating Tiger in the world today. The story surrounding the haunted status of that tank claims it when it was first brought to the museum. A body of a German soldier was found inside. Now, every night there are rumors of a bloody, ghostly hand reaching out from the turret and sounds of screams coming from inside the tank. Numerous workers and guests at the museum reported seeing a man wearing a German World War II uniform walking around the tank. Sightings became so common on the museum floor that the ghost was given the name of Herman the German. It's believed he was a former occupant of the tank and then lost his life inside it. Now, there is another explanation for this story. It had made up by the museum curators wanted to keep teens and vandals from visiting the museum at night. Prior to the frequent reports of sightings, it wasn't unusual for artifacts to disappear from the museum. Even after the museum reported that Herman the German might just have been made up to protect the museum, the sightings continued. Even in other parts of the museum, people report seeing things move, hearing footsteps, or feeling they're being watched. Orbs, which are believed to be indicators of spirits, are common in photos taken at the museum. Let's go to the Philippines, Clark Hospital. Site of so many hauntings, it's widely considered to be one of the most haunted places in the world. That GLTV featured the location as part of the I Wouldn't Go In There series because of all the stories and the history attached to the place. The hospital was part of the American Air Force Base in Pampanga. From 1903 to 1991, it was under the control of the U.S. Air Force, and much of the area is now the Clark International Airport. The Air Force Hospital was part of the base that's abandoned. In World War II, the base was expected to be a stronghold in the upcoming war against Imperial Japan. The Army sent large numbers of planes to the base in order to strike against Japan, but most of those planes were destroyed in an attack that occurred just 9 hours after the attack on Pearl Harbor. And the base fell to the Japanese in 1942, and American POWs were forced to march past the once welcoming gates of the base as part of the Bataan Death March. The base was reclaimed in 1945 and served to care for American soldiers before they were sent home. It became part of operations during the Cold War and the Vietnam War as well. The hospital itself supported used as an asylum for American soldiers, and that adds to the history of the restless spirits. Those who walk the decrepit halls of the old hospital today report the lights turn on and off. The reports of voices and screams echoing through the darkened halls where soldiers took their last breath and suffered under Japanese occupation. It's not just voices and lights that have put many folks claim Clark Hospital is one of the most haunted places in the world. After the Americans left the base, it was looted and vandalized by the locals, which only adds to the spooky feel of the location. Even worse, the reports that the spirits at the hospital are far from friendly. People brave enough to walk through the doors report debris being thrown at them from nowhere. Angry shouts and violent screams that warn any unwelcome guest from exploring the hospital and her ghostly inhabitants. With so many reports of ghostly sightings, sounds, and even violent attacks. It's said there are few places as terrifying as Clark Hospital. Then in Singapore, we have Changi Beach. The beach and its nearby hospital can still be the most terrifying places known in Singapore. In fact, Changi Hospital provided the inspiration for Halloween Horror Nights at Universal Studios Singapore in 2016. The hospital was a focal point for a local film called Haunted Changi. Pop culture surrounds the hospital's direct result of the history and the ghost sightings that accompany the location. Changi Beach is the location of the Suqing Massacre, where many Chinese were brutally murdered during the Japanese occupation. And those who are brave enough to walk along the beach where thousands were tortured and murdered can find ghostly evidence of these atrocities. And the common reports are the sounds of screams and people crying. There are sounds of fear and desperation as ghosts relive the fear of watching those they love be murdered either on the sand or shot to death by machine guns after being forced into the water. But the sounds of the beach are among the tamer hauntings that the location has become known for. Others have reported seeing floating heads flying over the sand or headless bodies trudging along the shore. The headings were a popular form of execution, and while they lost their lives on the beach, they still have losing their heads. Other accounts talk about large holes dug in the sand of the same shape and depth as you'd expect from a mass grave. Tortured souls continue to leave their mark on the beach and throughout the neighboring area. Changi Hospital nearby was used as a wartime hospital and has its own dark history. The soldiers lost their lives at the hospital and are said to walk the halls ever since. Also reports about black magic rituals that have been performed at the hospital as the cultists tried to use the hospital's souls in order to converse with the devil. On that note, we come to the end of today's show. We'll be back tomorrow. Once again, we'll be listening to Ken Hudnall, the Ken Hudnall Show. Until then, truly